I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist with the Amen Clinic, and I couldn't have had a better segue. There won't be any singing or bears during my presentation, so I'm sorry about that. But as they very, very greatly alluded to, and you kind of talked a little bit about, is the adolescent brain, right? And how it is different, how it doesn't mature yet. And I'm gonna just run you through a handful of slides. Now, my slides are a little bit wordy, but I try to play to multiple learning styles. Some people aren't a hearing learning, they like to see and read. So whatever works best for you, okay? But let's get started. So, you know, as they had said, Dan and Lisa, the adolescent brain, the brain itself does not finish developing until about the age 25. Now that's actually in women. Men, we're not quite as lucky. We don't get full development until about 28. So don't use that against your husbands if you're a young married couple, but it's true. And the time period of adolescence when we were teenagers is really a time of enormous transition. So the only other time in our lifespan where our brain does more growing and developing or as much is the first 4 to 5 years of life. And then we kind of chill out for a little bit, and then boom, adolescence comes and we get a whole host of things. Cognitive changes, emotional changes, social, physical, hormonal, and then of course morals and values. And what that looks like is, as society puts more influences on us. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that, each of these in a little bit more detail. So again, introduction, adolescence typically occurs between the ages of 10 to 19, and there's a little bit of variability there, marked by, a number of different physical and mental, emotional, developmental milestones as we go from basically becoming a child to an adult. And in our society, especially in our society, where everything is moving so fast, social media, etc., our adolescents are facing more change and more challenges than anybody before. Some of the really cool research in sociology has shown that in the last 20 to 25 years, our society has advanced more than the prior 100 years before that. So that gives you an idea of how fast we have to run to keep up. And it's hard, but it's hard to do. So we'll start with cognitive development, which of course is thinking of more in the terms of like thinking, reasoning, etc. And really the teen's brain is wired for learning. This is a time when it is soaking things up like a sponge. And one of the ways that it does this from a neuroscientific standpoint is through a process called myelination. So when we're younger, when we're kids, our brains are very busy, very inefficient. And once we hit puberty and we start the adolescent process, our brains start to get rid of stuff and neurons and things that it doesn't really need as much, and the connections that haven't been used, and it starts to really strengthen and grow these new connections or connections that we're reinforcing. That's why the skills that we learn when we're younger as kids, if we keep going through that, we can become very proficient at those things very quickly into a young adulthood. And the way that it does this is one of the ways it does this is through a process called myelination, where it adds this little fatty coating to the ends of neurons and makes these neurons way faster and way more efficient. But all of this maturation, as you can kind of see here in these scans, happens in a back to front process. And just like Dan and Lisa were saying, that prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that's responsible for reasoning and making good choices and logic, it is the very last part to develop. So you get the emotional and the physical and all of those parts of the brain developing and becoming really good and really strong. And then the reasoning part is not so much. And that's why as teenagers we make all those amazing decisions that we do. And so here's, some of the different things that we might kind of see when we think about thought patterns in adolescence. So differing rewards, really again, because the front of the brain's not mature, but the back is, we might, as teenagers, put more emphasis on that right now reward, or a reward that gives us some emotional gratification in lieu of thinking through what we're going to do. Then we have what we call hot versus cold thinking, which is this idea that adolescents and really adults in general may end up making a bigger decision or a faster, more rash decision during emotionally charged times than during these cold times where they have more time to think about things. And then sensation seeking, right? Teenagers typically look for novel ways to express themselves, to experience life. And of course that stimulates those reward centers, those big emotion centers. And that can be a great thing. In fact, sensation seeking and exploration is healthy. But if the front part of the brain's not putting the brakes on it sometimes, then we're spilling out in the neighbors' driveways and we're doing all these things that we shouldn't be doing. And sometimes we get away with it, and sometimes it puts us or somebody else in the hospital. So how do we support cognitive development? Because again, there's a huge difference between cognitive abilities in the adult versus cognitive abilities in the teenager. And so as adults, it's really important for us to not only recognize that, hence why I'm up here talking to you right now, but then also help guide our teenagers through this. So helping them learn a little bit more about their own thought processes by asking open-ended questions instead of just, yes or no, did you, didn't you? Really asking them to reason through things, and helping them consider the consequences of their actions. Providing more learning experiences, more novel experiences in a safe setting. Taking those weekend trips, going out and doing things. Promoting injury prevention and making sure that we're not letting our teenagers do anything too foolhardy. Sleep is huge. The brain is developing during adolescence. When the brain heals, when the brain grows, when the brain does so many different things that it does, is during sleep. If we are not sleeping, our brain is not growing properly. And when we do these SPECT scans, these functional images, and we're looking at what the brain is doing in real time, the sleep-deprived brain looks as bad or worse than a lot of the substance abuse brains do. Because again, chronic sleep deprivation doesn't allow our brain to heal. And in today's chronically sleep-deprived world where we're scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, oh, it's 2 o'clock in the morning, crap, I gotta be up in 4 hours. You can do that once in a while, but if that's a consistent sleep habit for you, you are hurting your brain. There's no doubt about it. And then seeking out opportunities to engage as learners, volunteer opportunities, leadership opportunities, and supporting our adolescents. And this is, one of the big reasons we're here today. One of the things that I do for a living is, supporting our adolescents that have behavioral health, mental health disorders, learning disabilities, and making sure that they're getting the accommodations that they need to. Emotional development. Now, obviously, this is a big one right here, right? We talked a little bit about it already. But really, the emotional development is this process, that is being driven by physical changes, cognitive changes, changes in social groups. There's so many different things that go into this. But again, the emotional brain has developed long before the thinking, reasoning part of the brain. And so, teenagers experience big emotions. It's a time of intense, turbulent emotions that can be really hard to manage and control, And so little things can become big things very quickly. And that's why self-management is such an important part, right? And self-management, some of us are innately better at it than others, but it's not an automatic thing that all of a sudden when we get our driver's license, we know how to manage our behaviors behind the wheel, or when we get a job, we know how to become an employee. These things are learned skills, and as parents, as adults in an adolescent's life, we can have a lot of power over how quickly and efficiently they learn these types of skills. And learning to recognize and manage and communicate emotions is huge. We have to teach our young people to have a healthy emotional vocabulary. So many young people deal with anger issues. And when you dive in, it's not that they're angry all the time, it's that they're frustrated, they're sad, they feel confused, they feel hopeless or helpless at times. But they only understand it as maybe as anger, and that's how it comes out. So sometimes just helping to develop these communication skills can mean the difference between the angry teen, the angry rebellious teen, and the teen who understands what it feels like to be frustrated or to be or to feel at times confused or scared. Hormones. So yes, of course, puberty is so much fun, so much fun. And there is a reason why, when we go from children to teenagers, all of a sudden we see a huge increase in things like depression and anxiety. Now, this is a very multifactorial thing. I'm not trying to oversimplify it, but one of the major factors are hormones. Hormonal changes can have dramatic effects on not only our physical self, but our emotional and cognitive self, mental health. And again, because of the way our brains are developing and that back to forward, emotional, physical, and then cognitive, when all of these hormones bring about these big emotions and all of these new thoughts and feelings that we've never had before, those can be very strong, very intense, and very overpowering for our adolescents. We also think about peer relationships and hormones and first boyfriends, first girlfriends, romantic interests, all of these things come about during this time. It can be very, very challenging. When we talk about stress and hormones and stress, right? And again, in today's day and age, we've got school, we've got jobs, we've got sports, we've got all of the global things that our teenagers are having to be aware of because of media and the news. That ignorance is no longer bliss in today's world. Everybody knows everything. And it is a stressful world for our adolescents. And both the acute day-to-day stresses that we all face that are a natural part of life, and these more chronic, insidious, almost traumatic stressors can all play a huge part in how our body releases hormones and how our brain reacts to those hormones. And that's one of the key issues in the traumatized brain. We're not going to talk about that too much. They did a great job of that. I don't think I could have said it better myself. But these heightened responses to stress, again, in this developing brain that I keep coming back to, can make it a lot harder and a lot more challenging for an adolescent to deal with than the adult. And as adults, we have to realize that and be willing and able to identify with these things. Be willing and able to not push so hard sometimes, and remember that kids are not little adults. They need downtime. They need time with their friends. They need the ability to express themselves. And if we are trying to push them in all these different directions in society and social media, then we're teaching our children to become chronically stressed, anxious people that then grow up to be chronically stressed, anxious adults. And we don't want to do that. But because this is a time of brain development, these pathways get hardwired in, and we see it on the SPECT scan. You can see what chronic stress and trauma does to the brain. It's fascinating, and it's also really scary. But the beautiful thing about it is that just like a brain can be wired, a brain can be rewired, a brain can be healed, but habits have to change. And if we can prevent this from happening so that we don't have to rewire it, then I think that's the best way to go, in my opinion. This is kind of just what I was talking about here, right? This is really more alluding to not the healthy stress that we all deal with. Anxiety and stress are a part of life. We have to learn how to deal with them. They're motivating. It's a good thing. Chronic toxic stress, PTSD, all of these things, kind of like I was mentioning earlier, not healthy, right? These are the ones that are really cause us the problems and rewire the brain in very long-lasting, sometimes pretty even permanent ways. Of course, when we think about adolescence and we think about that period of time and all of these changes, one major issue is with self-esteem, right? And self-esteem can really exist on a vast continuum. And it is normal for people to feel higher levels of self-esteem in one domain and less so in another. That's called competence. Adolescence is a time of development of autonomy, individual identity, and competence. And if we as adults are not helping them to achieve that, then more can be hurt than just their self-esteem. But self-esteem and the core ideas behind this, as you can see in that pretty little image there, really are developed during adolescence, and of course can be highly influenced, by peer pressure, by social media, by school, by their own achievements, by family. So many things can affect the way we feel about ourselves and our ability to go about our life in the world. So, and then I like this little thing down at the bottom where, and this is true, and there's been multiple studies on this, that, adolescents that with a positive self-concept, that, experience much greater academic success and success in life than the ones who lack this ability. So, it's kind of, their perception becomes their own reality. And that's particularly dangerous in today's social media driven world where, everybody in social media, has this perfect life and it's just happy, 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 and why can't I have this? It affects our self-esteem, it affects our perception of ourselves, and then we are more likely to not do well. Body image, another really big topic here, right? Of course, goes along with self-esteem. I think all of us in this room, everybody has something about their body that they wish they could change, they want to work toward. And that's healthy and that's normal. Of course, feeling so terrible about yourself, and this again, where social media, on the filters and all the technology that people can apply to change the way they look, can be really damaging. But, if we don't have some appreciation for our body and some general positive regard for ourselves and who we are, it can create a really nasty situation. And this is where things like eating disorders and chronic anxiety and, suicides even can come from us, especially, again, in today's very superficial and appearance-driven social media world. And as we all kind of alluded to, and as I was talking about earlier, adolescence is this critical time of identity formation. This is really probably the biggest and most core part of adolescence from an emotional, social standpoint. And it's the process of which we, again, go from kids to adults, but not just kids to adults, but when we create who we are as a person, when we start to understand ourselves and our roles in our world and in society and who we are as people. But during this very transformative process, this can vary very rapidly, and that's why we see teenagers, frequently maybe changing their social circles, maybe changing the way they look, their appearance, what they're into, what they're not into. Interests can vary wildly, and for parents, this can be difficult, especially if what their teenager is interested in doesn't vibe with, say, traditional family norms or expectations, or maybe they just legitimately don't agree with the choices that they're making. Now, of course, if they're dangerous, if they're hurtful, that's one thing. But this idea of being able to accept our teenagers' changing view of themselves during this tumultuous and ever-changing time of critical development, if we can do that, it's going to really help foster a sense of autonomy and independence and self-esteem and positive regard in our teenagers, and of course that carries on to adulthood. Now, as I alluded to a second ago, one of the things that changes with identity formation are social circles, right? Friends become a lot more important during adolescence. Family is still important, but it's very normal for teenagers to spend a lot more time with friends, girlfriends, and peers. And peer groups may change, they may evolve. That's also very normal. And so that can lead to things like peer pressure, experimentation, again, behaviors that might not be traditionally seen in this child growing up, or what might not be expected with family. But as long as they're safe, as long as no one's getting hurt, and we have an awareness as parents. I've got 3 children myself, the oldest of whom is 13. And so, and I struggle with this too sometimes. My oldest son, one of his ways that he likes to interact and hang out with his friends is on computer games. And I'm a gamer a little bit myself, but as long as there's a balance with that, I've had to learn to be more accepting of that, because that's a way that kids socialize now that just didn't exist when I was a teenager. And so we can fight against it, we can push against it, we can, stop it from happening. But if we can learn to create clear expectations and boundaries and show an attitude of acceptance and curiosity and understanding, we're far more likely to get our teens on board, and a lot less likely to have, conflict. So, looking at some ways that we can help support emotional development. I'm not going to read through all of these, but strengthening those communication skills, that happens at home with us during our conversations. And again, if we're not willing to have a conversation with our child because everything is just black and white and this is how you're going to do it and this is how you're not going to do it, well then how can we expect them to be healthy communicators? Nurturing that self-regulation, which again comes back to allowing our children and our teenagers to express themselves, to take risks, healthy risks, and to help guide them through that, instead of putting that hard wall up against everything, which as concerned parents who want our children to be safe, we often do, because we just are trying to protect them. And that comes to that limiting exposure to risky situations, right? Not keeping them in the house and never exposing them to the world, but making sure that they're understanding what behaviors are good and what are not, and when and how to say no. And I love the idea, I don't remember who it was, using the parent as the scapegoat. If that's what you have to do to get out of a situation, because you've got friends peer pressuring you got to say, what, my lame dad is just he's a control freak. But you know what? If I do this thing, I'm not going to see daylight for a month, so I just can't. Okay, fine. I tell my son, throw me under the bus. I don't care. If your friends don't like me, whatever. I'm 39 years old. Crap. But I want them to like you, right? I want them to like you. Unless they're trying to put you in risky situations that are bad, then maybe we need to think about finding different friends. And then coming back to that stress, right? Promoting healthy stress management skills, and what that looks like. And that, again, one of the key features there is helping our teenagers understand what stress is, what stress isn't, what is healthy stress, what's unhealthy stress, and helping foster that healthy, open communication and emotional vocabulary. And then a little bit more, really, we've a little bit talked about promoting the healthy exploration. I've already kind of gone over that. Helping teens think about and reflect on risky situations. And this was also brought up earlier, where, if you do get put into a risky situation, maybe you even made a bad decision. Maybe you did give in and you had a beer, or something to that nature. If we as parents, if they feel like they could come and talk to us, or even if they were to say they had 2 or 3 beers and now they have a vehicle, instead of them getting behind the wheel of a vehicle, they call somebody, right? All of those things are, can be really helpful, but then talking to them and having those conversations about, okay, what went wrong here? How could we do this better? How could we avoid making this decision in the future? So that underdeveloped prefrontal cortex that couldn't think through it at that time now gets a chance to think through it, to make those connections, and hopefully help start to establish those healthy habits. Because the more we do it, the better we get at it, the easier it's going to be the next time to make the right decision. And then paying attention to warning signs. That's where a doctor like myself might come in. But of course, if our teenagers are expressing or showing signs of depression, anxiety, we're worried about substance abuse, there are things going on where they're like, okay, there's some big red flags coming up here. Not only do we have to be able and willing to have a conversation with our teenagers about it,
but also knowing when it's appropriate to get help, and hopefully teaching them to know when it's appropriate to get help, which, for teenagers can be hard to do. For all of us, it can be hard to do sometimes. Social development, last little category we'll go through here. This is a time of transition from childhood to adulthood, and that means adult social roles. So during our teenage years, we start to drive. We might get our first job. We're probably going to have our first girlfriend or boyfriend. We are going to start stepping into some adult social roles, and with that might also come more adult responsibilities. And again, that prefrontal cortex isn't there yet. So expecting our teenagers to be able to manage these situations like we as the parents or the adults could is unrealistic at best. And so we have to be able to, again, keep that dialogue open with them and understand how to manage our own expectations of our adolescents. And then of course, as their social circles expand, not just thinking about job, boyfriend, girlfriend, but again, also friends, and what that might look like, and differing peer groups, peer pressure, etc. So kind of getting into that already, talking about the different roles and responsibilities, physical development, right? So this is a time where many of our adolescents in society may even become sexually active, and what that can bring. We start to look at, again, a whole host of body image issues and a lot of things that can come in that realm. And again, as parents, as mentors, as adults in these kids' lives, we have to be open and aware and educated about these things so that we then can help our adolescents get through this and manage these things in a healthy way. Some social challenges. Now, some of these are, I think, universal, and we've all experienced them. But of course, in today's day and age, there's a lot more avenues by which some of these things are coming through. We've talked a little bit about physical maturation and how that can have impacts in the way that they're viewed by their peers. The evolving friend groups, and that may even mean that for a period of time they get in with a friend group that we, as the parents, as the adults in their life, don't really agree with, and how to handle and manage that in a healthy way, keeping the communication open, allowing them to take those healthy risk-taking activities and being accepting of their wanting to explore and grow as individuals and learn who they are. Of course, there's also, today's day and age, we have social media and the pressure and things that come of that. And that we could have a whole day talk on that, no problem. And kind of segueing into that is social media. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but cyberbullying, social media influences, while social media and technology can be a beautiful thing, and technology allows us to do the spec scans that we use us to help patients. Technology is not bad, and neither is social media. We can reach people, we can talk, we can have these conversations in ways that we never could before. We can keep up with family, but there are a lot of terrible things that go on the internet and in social media, and our teenagers are at the very frontier of that, with cyberbullying, with social media, with internet gaming, addiction, and the studies are very clear. You can look at neuroimaging of a person on social media or playing a video game and watch the same areas of the brain light up as somebody who is a heroin or cocaine addict. It is absolutely addicting, and we have a lot of technology addicts in our society, and it can be just as hard to get off of, especially considering it's not illegal. It's a cell phone. It's all around us all the time, and we lose lots and lots of kids every year to suicide over this. It's a really big problem, and while the government and some of these social media companies are working to kind of try to reel it in and contain the beast, Unfortunately, the numbers, especially post-COVID, those numbers and those trends are not going in the right direction. Hopefully they start to, but it's a scary situation. And so how can we help support social development? Well, if we want our children to know how to have good relationships, we better be able to model what a healthy relationship looks like. So, if what we're gonna expect of them, we have to show. We also have to be able to exhibit empathetic behavior. If we go through life acting with little regard toward other people, and everything is kind of about instant gratification and ourselves, which in today's society, unfortunately, we see a lot of that. How can we expect our children to be kind, compassionate, loving people? We have to teach them how to deal with peer pressure, as we've already kind of talked about. And a lot of that comes back to communication and giving them tools and strategies that they can use to say, get out of a bad situation and make a good decision. Knowing our adolescent social circle, right? So maybe our teenager, like for example, a little bit of self-disclosure, and I think back on my dad. He's not alive anymore, so I can't ask him, but I know I put a lot of gray hairs on his head because throughout most of high school, I was the gothic kid. The fishnets, the Marilyn Manson t-shirt, piercings, it was, yeah. Now I stayed away from a lot of the other stuff, but I had friends that did, and a couple of them my dad was a little wary about, but they weeded themselves out pretty quickly. But he, despite the fact that he was very, very, very vocal about how much he hated the way I dressed and everything else, he got to know my friends and was generally kind to them, and that was hugely helpful for me. And as a result of that, he knew who the friends were that were safe and the friends were that weren't. Even though he didn't like the way they dressed, he hated the music we listened to, he still understood that if he just turned a blind eye or tried to just put a hard line, it wasn't going to work. And he did a good job in that regard. He modeled appropriate behavior for me, which then allows me to do it for my children and kept me out of trouble. And then I think encouraging participation in activities that adolescents care about, right? So sports, leadership positions, roles. Again, even if it's something that's not really our thing, chess club, technology, whatever it might be. If there's something that gets our kid out in the world, gets them socializing, some face-to-face time, allowing them to do that, even if our goal and our dream is for them to be a football player. Well, maybe they're not into football. Maybe that's not their thing. Not everybody likes football. Maybe they love, maybe they love debate club. Cool. Let them do that and let them enjoy themselves and encourage it. Maybe it's better than them sitting there scrolling through TikTok. And then lastly, I won't touch too much on this, but moral development. Right now, morality is a very complex issue, and lots of things come into that. But neuroscience has shown us that there are parts of the brain that actually help control our moral behavior and are responsible for things like morality. And so, if we're not fostering good decision making and communication, the underdeveloped brain, because a lot of morality comes from those more frontal areas, it's going to be harder for our adolescents to make good, sound decisions based off of their own principles. And at times they may not even know what their own principles are. That may shift. And so we have to be prepared for that. And then thinking about, again, all the factors that come into morality, right? Family, religion, culture, society, friends, peer groups. And there's so many things that have to be dealt with when we think about moral, ethical reasoning and decision making, but also remembering that morality is one of the highest and most abstract levels of thought possible, and that requires a lot of that frontal thinking. So, expecting our adolescents to make sound moral, ethical decisions is, at all times, is not realistic. And so, just these last couple slides are just summaries. How can we really talk with our adolescents? Just some key points, right? respecting and acknowledging what they have to say, even if we don't agree, right? We as parents are not going to agree with everything our kids say or do or are interested in. Just like our parents didn't agree with everything we were interested in. And it goes up, Glenn, we have to remember that we were teenagers ourselves once. And it's important to keep that in mind. Teaching and modeling good communication skills, setting those clear and realistic boundaries, building connection by sharing your interests, letting them know that you're not just a dad, you're not just a mom, you're not just an uncle, you're not just a teacher, or whoever you may be in that adolescent's life, but you are also a human. You have interests, you have hobbies, you've made mistakes, and opening yourself up like that, even though that might be difficult, can really help a person, an adolescent, understand that what they're going through, what they're experiencing is normal. It's normal to feel this way. It's normal to feel like nobody else understands. And at one point in time, you felt that way too. Of course, when going back to the clear and realistic boundaries, it can be especially important in relationships, right? When we talk about sex, when we talk about social groups, when we talk about peer pressure, and really making sure that if we are going to set rules, if we are going to set limits with our teenagers, that they understand those boundaries and those expectations very clearly. And then letting them know when it's important to share sensitive information with you. Now, there will never be a more reluctant conversation than trying to get your adolescent to open up about something that happened or that they did. But if they know that they can come to you and talk about it without fear of retribution or anger or overreaction, and they can be honest with you, it goes a long ways. Now, there still might be consequences, right? I mean, there are going to be consequences for our action. That's life. But if they can't come to us as parents and as the people in their life, as the adults in their life that are responsible for their care and well-being and that they trust the most, then who can they go to? So in summary, kind of a wordy slide.